Welcome to the Cyber Sangha podcast. Cyber Sangha is a program of free live broadcasts, launched in 2009 by renowned teacher and author Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche. Join us as we draw on ancient Tibetan wisdom to discover how to connect with our best self and live to our highest potential. The following conversation, Meditation and Motion, Benefits of Yoga and Other Movement-Based Practices, happened on February 9th, 2021 as a Science and Spirituality Dialogue with Lorenzo Cohen, Satbir Sang Khalsa, Geshe Tenzin Wangyal, and Alejandro Chaoul-Reich. This was part of a year-long series, A Year of Body, Speech, and Mind. This content is for informational purposes only. Listeners should consult medical professionals for any physical or mental health concerns. Please use headphones and do not meditate while driving or operating machinery.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Alejandro Chaoul, and I'm excited about launching this series with Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche and our first speakers, which are Drs. Lorenzo Cohen and Dr. Satbir Singh Khalsa. So this is a first of a series that we're starting in this year on Science and Spirituality Dialogues. And I'll tell you a little bit about this series, some of the history, and then I'll pass it on to Rinpoche to tell you a little more of how this fits on the whole Cyber Sangha, and then get to our esteemed speakers. So this series really have two streams of how they come together to you today. One is the whole work that Rinpoche has been doing in Cyber Sangha during all these years, and actually way before COVID. So really, I think a pioneer in the use of Zoom and platforms. And so that in that way, the reason for that is that we don't have to reach just our local group, but really expand all over the world, and really many times with multiple translations. The other stream that makes this happen is another interest of Rinpoche in research. And since early on, even while he was in the monastery, he is interested in research. But really, when he came to Houston, where I am now, and I'll tell you a little bit more about me in a minute, he started getting in touch. Well, he was a Rockefeller Fellow at Rice University. He started getting in touch with the people at the medical center, and that planted a seed for a lot of the research that started happening, particularly in the mind-body area. And that's where actually Lorenzo Cohen, who's one of our speakers today, and why I wanted to bring him to this first one, because really it's through Rinpoche and Lorenzo that I became interested in research, both from being a practitioner myself and being with Rinpoche for almost 30 years, and then with Lorenzo working for over 20 years in this area. And then through Lorenzo, I met Satbir. And so, and that's how this is coming all together. So this series is body, breath, and mind. So today, we'll really focus on body. Of course, as we all know, and Lorenzo is telling me, oh, come on, you out of all people are going to just focus on body and not body, breath, mind. But these are all always interrelated. And yet, how can we talk more about body today, and how, of course, it has an impact on energy and its ways of breath and sound and mind, and vice versa. So, we'll talk on those topics. I do want to say something. Someone put a comment that we were not very gender diverse, and that's true. But I do want to say that there's other diversities here, as you might see in nationalities and in ethnicities, but also that in our next panels, you'll be happier that the panelists will be actually the both next panelists are women, are Judith Simmer Brown and Shirley Tellis, and the following two are women as well, Eve Ekman and Elisa Cosasa. So we'll balance out. So let me say a couple of words of our introduction, although you have all that information about our speakers. Geshe Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche probably doesn't need much introduction to this group. He, after finishing his studies in Menri Monastery in India, came to the West, first to Italy, and there's some relation here in Italy, and then to the US, and particularly he was here in Houston at Rice University as a Rockefeller Fellow. He founded the Ligmincha Institute, now called Ligmincha International, which has centers, around 35 centers all over the world. Before COVID, he used to travel extensively, and now he travels through the cyber way. And so he's bringing all these different programs and wants to continue to bring programs also for free to people as he has been doing. The other aspect, of course, is his interest in research, and that's why we have these kind of programs. Lorenzo Cohen is at MD Anderson, so a few blocks from where I am. I'm here at the Jung Center, at the Mind Body Spirit Institute at the Jung Center, but I used to work at MD Anderson with Lorenzo for 20 years. Lorenzo is a distinguished professor in clinical cancer prevention, and also is the director of the integrative medicine program at MD Anderson. He is one of the co-founders of the Society of Integrative Oncology. He was very active also and vice chair of the Academic Consortium for Integrative Medicine. And he's been always interested in lifestyle factors, and particularly how mind-body practices fit in, not just exercise and nutrition. He and Sadbir actually co-edited a book called The Principles and Practices of Yoga and Healthcare. So if you don't have it, that's a book to have. And he also, with his wife, Allison, co-wrote a book called Anti-Cancer Living, Transforming Your Life and Health Through the Mix of Six, which we'll get to. Sadbir Singh Khalsa. And also one more thing about Lorenzo that I want to bring in the conversation is his part of as a practitioner and how he lived with his grandma in Italy, a famous yoga teacher, Vanda Scaravelli. So again, his interest in research might have been impacted by that, and we'll talk about it, or we'll let him talk about it. Sadbir Singh Khalsa also has those both areas. He is a Kundalini, certified Kundalini yoga instructor. He's the director of yoga research for the Yoga Alliance. He's the director of research for the Kundalini Research Institute, and he's an associate at the Benson Henry Institute for Mind-Body Medicine. He's also an affiliate of the Osher Center for Integrative Medicine and assistant professor of medicine at Harvard Medical School in the Department of Medicine at Brigham Women's Hospital. And his research is different than Lorenzo, and that's why we want to bring them together. His interventions are more for insomnia, post-traumatic stress, and he does other kind of research also with breath that we might get into, although we'll focus on body. So welcome, everyone. Oh, I'd say just a moment about myself. I've been studying for almost 30 years with Rinpoche. I'm director of research for Ligmincha Institute, and I'm now director for the Mind Body Spirit Institute of the Jung Center here in Houston. So Rinpoche, I'd like to turn to you and ask you to say a few words of how do you envision the series and the whole kind of mandala of work that you're doing.
Good morning, everybody. And thank you, Alex, for a wonderful introduction, very clear. And I wanted to also first welcome Lorenzo, Sadbir Singh here. We met before, and Lorenzo, we have been collaborating things on projects and research in Houston for some time in the past. Haven't seen recently, but very wonderful to see you. And also wanted to welcome all our Cyber Sangha members. I just wanted to say, don't want to talk too much. I want to hear really more, wanted to listen rather than talking. But just as an introduction a little bit here, is that we have, as a cyber sangha, as a community, we are trying to really feel this sense of community rather than community based on one tradition or Hindu tradition, Sikh tradition, or Buddhist tradition, to this kind of school, that kind of school. No, this I this sense of cyber sangha, notion of cyber sangha, I felt like we all are somehow spiritual seekers. We all are practitioners. We know each other. We might not know each other, but fundamentally, we are all seeking the same thing. I believe that, and this so and during this pandemic, there seems like so much need of helping each other. I think fundamental thing is how to help somebody what they need, not what you want to teach them or what you think what they need. It's more what really trying to understand a little bit more what people's needs are these challenging moment and trying to bring those element in beyond tradition or schools and everything. So we're trying to do this monthly, what we call full moon practice. Every full moon, we have 24-hour cycle of meditation that organized by around the world, many countries involved, and lead by different practitioners. It goes on 24 hours. You can join anytime, different time zone. And so we thought maybe the best part of the practice that everybody can do, people who are familiar with these have knowledge on these things, but also people, maybe family members who don't have knowledge on these things, but they can still join. We call it three doors. Bodies, we all have the same body. The speech, the breath is the same breath. The heart and the mind is the same heart and mind. The blood is the same color. No color, and so it's same thing that we all are connected to, and their practice is just fundamentally same for everybody. So even though sometimes people might label them different name, and then it's like in a marketing, same medicine, you label it different, and then you charge more money and say it's better. But I think the fundamental these practices are the same, and so I think uh, minimum dividing labels, I guess. But they still we have to call something. We call body, we call breath, we call mind. We have to call something. So so our approach to support the sangha is do the full moon practice, month of body. This month is month of body. Next month is month of breath. The month after, month of mind. So when we do that, more I'm trying to teach a little bit more practical approach of what things can be done through the body, for the body, practice of body, and the breath, the practice of the breath, some very basic, simple things, and the mind, and for the mind. But we also want, many people are interested to know what's happening in the scientific research world. And of course, there are hundreds of papers that are coming all the time, every time. And most of the case, they are all going to the same direction, which is saying really these ancient yoga and meditation, breath, these principle helps. Help psychological, physical health, many ways they help. So, and I think we have experts who will share a lot of more about these things. So I'm very much looking forward, and and I'm sure afterward might have some question to ask after I listen to Lorenzo and Sadhbir Singh. So welcome everybody. Thank you. So I'll turn.
Thank you, Rinpoche. Thank you very much. And before I get to the speakers, I do want to say that this Cyber Sangha has a lot of people in the background working. And some of you might have seen 2 days ago the beautiful organization that Cyber Sangha showed, all the people that worked, particularly for this group. Polly, who's always in the back, you don't see her. She has helped put this all together, and the beautiful flyers that you've seen. And then Daniel and Valerio are the ones who are supporting the tech part. And then the one that you'll be seeing on the chat master is Mariela. And so Mariela Iragorri. And so thank you, all of you, because without you, we couldn't be doing this group. So what I thought I would do today is first of all, of course, we'll get into the research, but first, I'd like to get into the people. I want to see, Lorenzo and Sadbir, what brought you to this interest into these practices? If you can speak more from a personal way, whatever you want to share from that perspective. What brought you both to the practice and the research? How was a little bit your meandering in that way? So, Sadbir, you have the mic off, so I'll start with you.
All right. Yeah, so my history of getting involved in contemplative practices goes back to the early 70s, actually as part of the counterculture. And as part of the counterculture, we were investigating alternative realities from the 50s where everything was, just get a suburban lifestyle and get a profession and that's it. And we were questioning the deeper values of what's out there in terms of becoming a human. And that led a lot of us to experiment with hallucinogens and altered states of consciousness, if you will. And as part of my interest in that, I became very fascinated with the idea of developing these spiritual states of consciousness. And so I began reading books on the topic, and of course that led me to books on meditation and then books on other contemplative practices. And when I came across a book on yoga, I remember one passage in the book. It said, in yoga, all of the aspects of your life are targeted towards the development of those contemplative states. It's not just the mental cognitive component. It's your diet, it's your breath, it's your body, it's your everything. And that made a lot of sense to me. And so that led me to my first yoga class where I was experiencing both the body, the breath, the mind, and then ultimately going towards the spiritual component. So that it was a very sort of ordered and scientific approach to the lifestyle I adopted.
Thank you, Sadbir. Lorenzo, do you want to tell us a little bit about as early? I know you started very early with Vanda, with your grandma. Whatever you want to share.
Yeah. So thank you, and thank you for the invitation to join this group. And a lot of people don't get into this origin question, but I think it is an important one. And I guess mine actually dates back perhaps to around the same time of Sabir's, even though I wasn't fully conscious of what was happening. As Alejandro mentioned, my grandmother's Vanda Scaravelli, who came to yoga actually, when you think of this this sangha that's happening broken into three areas, she came to yoga originally through what we could call the mind and her very deep lifelong relationship with Krishnamurti. And in her midlife, when she met Krishnamurti, they would invite every summer BKS Iyengar to teach Krishnamurti what we could call, more conventional hatha yoga, and those who know the Iyengar's technique, certainly back in the 60s and 70s, it was very physical. And a separate teacher would fly in, Desika Char, to focus on the breath. So Vanda's pedigree, she always said, I had Krishnamurti for the mind, Iyengar for the body, and Desika Char for the breath. And I was born in Italy, and Vanda is Italian and lived there her whole life, and was exposed to this as a young child, having this sort of Indian philosophy, not Hinduism per se, but I guess you could say Krishnamurtiism, which is sort of just this open philosophy, which is not religious in nature, but deeply, deeply spiritual. Obviously, as a rebellious teenager, I had no interest in that. But of course, the seed was planted. And when I started focusing on career-related issues as an undergraduate focused in psychology, with always this interest in medicine, but never wanted to specialize. So my undergraduate focus was in health psychology, as well as in graduate school, focusing more in medical psychology, and actually went to a medical school, but received a PhD from their medical psychology program. And early on in my arrival at MD Anderson and choosing to go down the path of oncology, it became clear that not only do I need to measure the harms of stress, but we need to help patients manage their stress. And in doing so, could we actually have measurable effects, not only on their biology, but ideally on clinical outcomes as well. And of course, yoga, being this sort of quintessential mind-body practice, came right to the front, along with, of course, other modalities in conventional in nature, cognitive behavioral therapy, this more Western approach to dealing with mind, body, breath, and of course, Eastern approaches.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. So, Sadbir, what you focused in that journey into Kundalini Yoga. If you can tell the audience, can tell us a little more about what is Kundalini Yoga, what attracted you to Kundalini Yoga, and how from that you went to the research of the things that Kundalini Yoga could bring to humanity.
So I think, like most people who began a yoga class, I mean, a lot of people ended up following the tradition that was their first yoga class. And I think I followed that route as well. One of the advantages to Kundalini Yoga and one of the strengths of traditional yoga in general is that it incorporates all the components of yoga. So it's focused not only on the body, but also on the breath, also on relaxation, and also on the meditative and spiritual components. And so Kundalini Yoga was that kind of a style. It is mostly similar, but distinctively different from a lot of Hatha yoga styles. It's a very spiritual discipline. It's really focused on internal growth. So that's a very important component of it. The exercises tend to be shorter, but sometimes more vigorous. Some people consider it a vigorous style. On the other hand, it's totally applicable to any kind of population with any kind of limitations. And we use a lot of mantra, we use a lot of meditation, we use a lot of breathing meditations where the breath is combined with a mantra, with a mudra, and a posture. So we have many, many meditations and many different yoga sets. And many of these practices all have ascribed benefits. And so that is actually useful if you're a researcher. And the research part of me was there all along. I moved into an ashram in the early 70s, and after my Bachelor in Science degree. And then after living a yoga lifestyle for a while, my interest in science came back, but this time it came back with an interest in studying these contemplative practices. So in the mid 70s, I set a goal to do research on yoga, which took me back to getting a PhD in neuroscience. And then after a couple of postdocs, ultimately ending up in 2001, starting research on yoga with funding from the federal government. So for the past 21 years, I've been doing research on yoga full time. Many of that's been, much of that work has been clinical studies. So we've looked at yoga for chronic insomnia, for post-traumatic stress disorder, for generalized anxiety disorder and other anxiety disorders, and more recently also yoga in the public schools and yoga in the workplace. So that's kind of a brief history there.
Great, and I want to get more into those different kinds of research as well. And Lorenzo, you were talking how so with that background with Vanda and that actually in a way the three streams of body, breath, and mind so clearly with incredible teachers such as Krishnamurti and Iyengar and Desikachar, that even though you were this rebel, as we all are, as a teenage, you still kind of absorb that. So I actually remember going into your office maybe 23 years ago or so. I think 21 years ago, actually. It was 1999. And so I remember coming with this magazine, the Yoga Journal, where we had something on Tibetan yoga. And so we started doing some research in that area. So tell me a little more, or tell the group more about that interest and how you started getting into this area of yoga, what you thought, maybe if you want, about Tibetan yoga at that point. I remember some of the comments that you said about holding the breath and Vanda be turning over in her grave if she would hear that. But anyways, tell us a little more about that aspect of how you enter in that research part.
So as I mentioned, clearly we need to help people manage their stress. The evidence on the link between chronic stress and simplistically, essentially every single biological process in your body, it is a negative relationship, simplistically. Chronic stress decreases immune function, floods our body with stress hormones, increases heart rate and blood pressure. It literally gets into every cell in our body, wreaking havoc. And although, we all need to adopt practices that allow us to approach our world with more calm and equanimity, balance. In the oncology world, it is a more of an acute issue that if people don't manage their stress, and there's a fair amount of evidence that those who do not don't live as long. So the question is, what are the, not the best approaches, but what are different approaches that we can bring to patients? And as Rinpoche said in the beginning, there's not, one that's better than the other. So I had a, particular interest in the psychology side of things in general, and of course had the seed planted of yoga. And what I knew of yoga and mind-body practices from the East was, the Indian-based practice, of course, which is eclectic in nature. From China, of course, we had Tai Chi and Qigong. From Japan and Korea, other forms of martial arts. And then when we look to the mountainous region of Tibet, you have meditation. And of course, deep meditation tradition, which is, from my perspective, sitting and emptying your mind. And of course, everyone in this Sangha knows that may be one, but there's 80,000 plus other types of meditation, which I had the honor of learning from people in this meeting. And so when you walked in my office and you said, that you're from the Tibetan tradition, you've been studying this for a while, I immediately think, that could be interesting. It's a seated practice, but then you don't really have as much the breath and the body. And you use the term, we don't really call it this, but, let's call it Tibetan yoga. And it's just like, what Tibetan yoga? I'd never heard that Tibetans had movement-based practices as part of the tradition. So quickly learned about the Burn tradition and Salung and Trungkor and other strategies. And, it was clear that this is, as Rinpoche again said from the beginning, looking at it, under a microscope, so to speak, the practices may look different. In one, you're holding your breath, in the other, you are working with a flowing breath. But they are all practices with a common goal. And of course, that goal isn't to manage chronic stress, because I think chronic stress is a product of modern society. The origins that we can get into, and I would not want to profess that I know the origins with Rinpoche on the call and let him speak to the origins. but it will help people to find calm and to find balance in their life and to find more meaning and purpose, and particularly again when people are struggling with a life-threatening illness. So I was not only open but really wanted to explore different practices. So we've done research with Salong and Trungkor, we've done research with Tai Chi and Qigong, as well as practices from the Indian tradition. And again, the actual exercise that one does may look and feel different, but I think the common goals are all the same. And Alejandro, being a historical scholar in this area, you can of course speak to some of the original origins of this, and it probably did come from this kind of you could say original source, and then using it in a good way, kind of mutated as it went to different regions of the world, but the focus was always the same. So we kind of approach our research in unfortunately a reductionistic way, but we can get into that next.
Thank you. Thank you. Actually, I would say that I don't know if there is a common source. I think the common source is human beings. And so each one kind of expresses it in their own way. And that's why we have streams. But Sadbir, I was thinking, you had a background in neuroscience, yet I remember we are in this particular conference and you were complaining why there were so much in mindfulness and other practice of the mind. Where's yoga? And you really push for that to kind of bring it back to the body. So
Right.
talk a little bit about that part and the importance of body in that body, breath, mind.
So if you look at the history of so-called mind-body medicine, and some of the early work was Herb Benson working with TM meditators, introducing this novel construct in medicine that if you make cognitive changes, if you meditate, you can have an effect on the body. And so the early research was all about Herb Benson's relaxation response, about how quieting the mind can have physiological effects. And that was really novel at that time. And that grew, and in fact, with the appearance of the Buddhist tradition, with the work of John Kabat-Zinn and Richie Davidson, suddenly we have this term mindfulness, which is now another form of meditation. And as you know, mindfulness is essentially taking over the world. It's everywhere. It's invading every form of therapy, and you're not a psychologist anymore unless you're using mindfulness approaches. And I think we have now gone a little bit overboard with that, and in fact forgetting the whole sort of the mind-body connection, because there's also, in addition to mind-body practices, there's body-mind practices. These techniques work both ways, and so I think a lot of people are sort of just getting into the meditation and forgetting about the body, and I think that's a lost opportunity, if you will, because the body is very important. You can't do an hour of mindfulness meditation and then go off to the bar and eat a steak and smoke cigarettes. It doesn't work that way. The body has an influence on your cognitive activity, on your emotional activity. And so I think that's something that myself and my colleague Peter Wayne, who's a Tai Chi researcher, are starting to push this whole idea. Hey, don't forget about the body. And I think one place where that really manifests this whole idea of the importance of the body is in psychological disorders, or disorders which are called psychological, if you will. So, for example, in my research, I've studied insomnia. We've looked at anxiety disorders. We've looked at post-traumatic stress disorder. Those are technically classed as cognitive conditions. If you have one of those things, you go to see a psychologist or psychiatrist. That's the way medicine approaches that. But if you look carefully at these disorders, there are large components of the body dysregulation involved, particularly in PTSD. That's the best example, People with PTSD are dissociated from their bodies. They have a startle reflex. They exhibit lower levels of physical activity on average, and it's almost as though their body is holding the trauma as well as the brain is. And so this whole idea of applying a mind-body technique to a mind-body disorder really makes sense. And so I think that's something that we need to sort of bring back the balance. We've gone a little bit too much into the meditative cognitive component, forgetting the body and the breath. So I think that's where the body has relevance, because everything that happens in the body is reflected in the mind and vice versa. That's the central construct behind mind-body medicine. And there are a few examples of where very clearly known to everyone, something in the body will reflect in the mind. I mean, if you do a long jog for 10 miles, you know that you're also mentally relaxed when you're done. If you get a massage, you're mentally relaxed and your mood changes with that. So there's very clear effects. And the same happens with yoga postures. And these contemplative physical exercises like Tai Chi and yoga are different than Western aerobic exercises. They generate this relaxation effect more effectively because there's much more stretching and slow movement involved. And so I think we're as a mind-body group and also in modern medicine, we've forgotten a little bit about the body-mind effect.
Thank you.
That's what actually struck me when you, Alejandro, first introduced to me the Tibetan yoga practices, for lack of a better word, and that I recall you sharing that one aspect of the origin of the movement was actually that acknowledgement that sitting for 8 hours and meditating in these temples and during these intensive trainings is too much. It's not healthy. It's not good for you, let alone the fact that movement is good for you. So you had described that was one aspect of the origins of these, is that there was this need to sit and meditate for extended periods of time, but that every once in a while the abbot would engage in movement-based practices that the disciples would then follow. And so there was this awareness, millennia ago, that you had to have both. You had to nourish both aspects, because to even use the term mind and body is kind of a misnomer, and I understand we need to use language to be able to communicate these concepts, but the fact that we talk about them and have two different words for these things, is in some sense the origin. We can throw Descartes under the bus and blame him for this duality, but it shouldn't exist. We shouldn't even think of these things as separate from each other, because it's all connected. I guess it's for, in some sense, lack of good language and being able to partly study these things in this more reductionistic way that we have, in some sense, compartmentalized, when in fact, we'll be better if we can keep these pieces together and look at it from the whole.
Thank you. And Rinpoche, I want to bring you in now, particularly, as Lorenzo was saying, and I remember being in Menri Monastery with Ponlotin Lunima and asking him about the origin of some of these practices. And he was saying that when meditators get some of the difficulties, the obstacles, the gek, they would start doing specific movements that then became formalized, and then some of these Tsalung and Trungkor came to being. So how was your experience with these movements in your practice and in your incredible training?
Well, I will answer that later, but I think I wanted to have a request to our speakers first, a little comment. So The request is if both of you can maybe, if somebody says you have a few minutes to tell us the most quintessential practical aspect, advice, how should I work with my body? You have only a few minutes. What you would tell me. So I would love to ask you both that there might be people who really think, okay, we get it. There's a lot of research. There's a lot of things there, but I don't know much, but give me a few words, advice that I can improve my life. So that's a request to both of you. And the comment is that I think Satbir and Lorenzo both said very well that, I always felt that, that it's in every different tradition, there's a tendency to go to body too much, particularly in the West, although everywhere is yoga center, but there's no focus on the mind, or somewhere going talking too much about energy, and somewhere too much about psychology. They're too much about analysis and ignoring the body part, ignoring the energy part. These, like a lack of integration, I guess, it seems like a very pervaded in this culture. So just to say a little bit that I think body, breath, and mind. So it means movement, and then there is the breath, the energy, and then there is attention and awareness. These three things, I think, always absolutely necessary to go together. They always go together, but sometimes natural law is they have to go together. They go together. When they go together, it's much healthier. When they are separated, divided, disconnected, then that's where I think many disorders or the sickness and everything arises. So just thinking about that, even in like one area of body, like yoga, when we do a yoga, it's always a posture of movement. But postures and movements are related with the specific locations of the body, like Tsalung. You're doing the heart exercise. It's happening here. What's happening? There's a movement happening here. When you do this, movement is happening. When you're doing this, movement is happening here. So there's a movement designated location in an area where energetically you can think about heart chakra, but even emotionally, physical sense, even the heart is there, lung is there. The movement is happening there. So when the movement is happening there, there's no way the breath not to participate in it. The breath is moving there. It depends on us, the intensity of the movement of the body. Breath is moving also. And when the breath is moving, it's releasing a lot of tension and stresses, and it's naturally opening up some sense of clarity to the mind. So mind immediately feels clear, feels better, feels more relaxed. So it's a very natural law, I guess. Either as the entire body, it's a law, but in a very specific area of exercise, movement is there, breath is there, the attention is there. So every single meditation is happening the same. So what my feeling is, just some sense of advice, I guess. My thought is, I think we all need to move our body. That's what I'm trying to say. Because in this culture, the obesity, and people are sitting too much in front of computer, too long sitting in. So I'm saying, all the people who are listening, go out there, move your body. Of course, you don't just think about planning this fancy 10 or 15 different movement of the yoga. You're not even going out. So I think the movement, when you are moving your body, your breath is already there, and the breath is already there, the mind will already clear. So going back to the Alex's question, I think, I will question, and then also I want to make a little comment on Lorenzo. When Lorenzo was talking about, ultimately it's reducing stress and chronic and sickness and so yes. So in our point of view, we don't exactly look at it that way. We definitely think it is our main purpose is to be free from all the afflictions of the mind, to be liberated. That's the original purpose of these yogic traditions. So, of course, we will not go into that. But the idea is to be free from the afflictions of the mind, because somehow mind is always responsible for what happens in the body. Because even at some point, You cannot get rid of sickness. If you're sick, you're sick. If you're dying, you're dying. You cannot try to find a way to not get sick. You cannot try to find not to die. It's a question about how you're going to embrace it well, how peace you have with life, how peace you have with the situation, whatever the life is providing, which is, you never know. Like a pandemic year, 2020, how you embrace it? You cannot change that, but you can change yourself. So it's always, in the end, is teaching you how to work with the circumstances. I think in these ancient meditation yoga traditions, that they are always talk like this wisdom, like 5 wisdoms, and one single wisdom, 5 wisdom, how to achieve that realization, how to enhance that, how to support that, how to overcome obstacles when you face challenges in meditation with that. That's the way different kind of yogic meditations are coming. Different postures are coming, different movements are coming, different attentions are coming. So every different issues kind of brings up a different means to overcome that. I think that's traditionally, that's what happens. Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Rinpoche. So let's go to Rinpoche's request. Sadhbir, do you want to start?
Sure. So the request is really how do we work the body in a way that's best? And I think the answer really is in when you look at yoga and Tai Chi and other mind-body practices, they are distinctly different than what we're used to in the West. The aerobic type exercises, swimming, jogging, weightlifting, those are focused on musculoskeletal strength and endurance. And that's fine. We need that. There's no question about that. But what is lacking in Western type exercises is what we have in things like yoga and Tai Chi. One of those components is stretching, moving the body in such a way as to stretch the limbs. And there's a very unique psychophysiological response when you stretch the body. The body-mind effect is very clear when you do stretching type exercises. We don't have a lot of research in this area, but some of the research around the whole idea of fascia and how the connective tissue is stretched and the whole syncytium of fascia throughout the body, how that's impacted, that research is really quite remarkable and is really telling us that this idea of stretching is very important. Another aspect that's typical in contemplative body practices is the isometric, the holding of postures. Particularly in yoga, you hold a posture for a specific period of time. And that has a very unique and different effect than sort of the Western aerobic type exercises. So that has a very specific benefit that you can't get as well from the aerobic movement type exercises. Another aspect that I think is also unique in yoga and Tai Chi that's emphasized is this whole idea of balance. You have balancing postures in yoga, and of course the stance and the movements in Tai Chi are all about holding the balance of the body, coming from your center, from your navel point, and so on. So these are elements of how these physical practices are very unique and include, types of physical exercises that we don't emphasize in Western type of physical exercise routines.
Thank you, Sadhbir. Lorenzo.
Yeah, I don't think I can add to that except to emphasize this fascia concept. And the fascia has been summarily ignored in most research in the area of physical activity. And it's now viewed as actually, it's viewed, I believe, almost as an organ in the body, which is, all the interstitial tissues that are surrounding everything and connecting everything. So here we come back to the concept of the connection. Well, how is your thigh connected to the brain? It's through the fascia. And as crazy as it sounds, one of our colleagues, Helen Langevin, is doing research stretching mice to see what happens. It's as close as we can get to doing animal studies of yoga. And I encourage the listeners to take a look at this body of research, which is helping perhaps to explain the stretching benefits of yoga practices, as well as the mechanisms behind acupuncture, where when you stick an acupuncture needle into what would be classified as a real acupuncture point, the fascia grabs the needle, and part of a standard acupuncture technique is to twist the needle, so it's twisting the fascia. When you stick an acupuncture needle in a placebo point, a point that's not active, the fascia doesn't grab that needle. So the stretching component is critical. And then, of course, as Sabir mentioned, the aerobic component, which Rinpoche said, just get out there and walk. I mean, so stretching and walking in whatever form you do it is the two probably most important things that you can do with your body. And I think, to Rinpoche's comment about aspects of the mind and suffering, and to be free from afflictions, I think, an important thing to consider is that, our brain is really unique compared to all other mammals. And, it is a gift to have this prefrontal cortex that allows us to imagine and to think about the future and to work with things from the past. But it, of course, comes with problems if not managed properly. And we may think that these practices that help us avoid the afflictions of the mind may be indulgences, but the mind can cause illness to our bodies. And Sapir's research in PTSD. Well, what is PTSD? It's reliving an event from your past. The event is over. And it's easy to say, well, just stop thinking about it. But we've evolved from ancestors who benefited from remembering something that was dangerous, to be able to not put yourself in danger again. And the complexity of our world now, our brains essentially have not adapted to this. And the Tibetans, knew 5,000 years ago or more, as well as other scholars of psychology, that this gift that we have needs to be managed carefully, and this is where the body being connected to the brain, and therefore the mind, is important to keep in mind, but also the downstream effect. And then just the last comment about the body affecting the mind. We really know this now definitively, and perhaps we didn't know it as well 20 or 30 years ago. But our gut, as just an example, in your stomach is the microbiome, and there are neurotransmitters that actually have an origin from your stomach. So, for example, serotonin, very rich in our gut, and will have an influence on our brain. The vagus, which is a nerve that is innervated within the diaphragm, goes up and stimulates the brain. So the movement in the back bend is actually going to be stimulating the vagus. Deep diaphragmatic breathing, we can call that an aspect of the breath, but it's also the body. It's the critical importance of the body, where you lower the diaphragm, it stimulates the vagus. It releases the parasympathetic tone, which helps to drive down sympathetic arousal, the stress response. So these physical aspects have clear biological innervation that then influences the brain and therefore the mind.
Thank you. And that makes a lot of sense with Sadbir's previous comment, that there's a difference between just doing exercise than doing these body-mind practices that actually have an effect. And in fact, today we talk about not just yoga, but yoga therapy, right? So, Satbir, do you want to talk a little bit about that and how that has that aspect that, as you were saying, that differentiates just of us doing exercise, whether it's biking, swimming, walking, and actually doing some of these particular practices that aim at these uh, uh, vagus nerve or particular, even if we wanted to touch a little bit about chakras and other things, but
Hmm.
on a different level of the body.
So just coming to the vagus for a moment, just to expand on what Lorenzo was saying. I mean, the vagus is well known for being efferent. In other words, it goes from the autonomic nervous system of the brain and innervates most of the organs in the body. And so we know that when we do these contemplative practices, we activate this relaxation, parasympathetic, relaxation of the organs and calming and quieting. It's the opposite of the fight or flight response. But 80% of the vagus is afferent, meaning that these vagal nerves that distribute out throughout the body convey information to the brain. And this may well be the way that we get the positive feelings that come from exercise. When we activate these afferents through these exercises, we generate that positive experience, that positive sense of physical well being. Um, in terms of yoga therapy, the yoga therapist is going to address the individual on a case by case basis. Some people are more physical, some people are more psychological, some people have disorders which are more cognitively based, some people have disorders which are more physically based. And I think the yoga therapist will sort of address which component needs the most work. And one of the tools in yoga and one of the central principles of asanas, the theory is that specific yoga postures have specific effects on the body and on the mind. So there are exercises that are said to be good to make you happier. There are exercises that are said to make you more energetic. There are exercises that make you calmer, for example. And so we have this whole body of literature historically from these yoga scriptures that argues that these specific asanas can be like prescriptions. So if you have a problem with sleep, for example, there's an asana that is favored for inducing the ability to fall asleep. Now, the evidence is lacking at this point in time. It's a little bit ironic because yoga is really known mostly as a physical practice, but the research that we have on yoga, the weakest part of that is the effects of our physical asanas on the body. We know much more about the meditative and breathing components of yoga in terms of their psychophysiological effects. But just one example is a study that was done by a colleague at UCLA. It was a very humble study, and it was evaluating the claim in Iyengar yoga that back-bending poses are psychologically uplifting and elevating, whereas forward-bending poses are calming and quieting. And so he put that to a simple test. He took yoga practitioners and gave them a standing posture, which was neutral, a forward bend, and a backward bend. And after each exercise, these folks filled out a mood questionnaire. How happy did they feel? How sad did they feel? And what they found was that indeed, after the backbending poses, people felt more happiness and less sadness, whereas there was no change with the neutral pose or the forward bending pose. So that's kind of a little bit of the validation of this idea that we can use specific exercises and specific postures to generate specific effects. So perhaps someday in the future, we'll have prescriptions. So you come into your yoga therapist and get your diagnosis, and then you walk away with a prescription for specific asanas to practice. In some sense, that's already the case because we know that low back pain, some of the physical contributors to that, you want to do specific types of exercises that will strengthen the back. So this would be an extension of that into more subtle realms.
Thank you. Yeah, and we see that in the Tibetan yoga too. And I think I remember talking with Rinpoche, one of the early on in some of the texts that we're looking at, they say, this particular posture kind of beats anger, releases anger, for example, right? Can we actually test that? Or like Rinpoche was showing, this opens up, can we, and this was one of the questions when Rinpoche, Lorenzo, and I met, and Lorenzo asked him, if you would measure whatever you wanted to measure in these patients, what would it be? And Rinpoche said open-heartedness. We're still hoping that's something that we can measure. Lorenzo, I wanted to come back to this question of exercise and contemplative body-mind practices, because in a lot of the research studies that we have done, the control group was exercise. So we have done, looking at Tibetan yoga, and the control group was stretching. We have done, yoga from Svyasa tradition, and the control group was stretching. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, so this gets into the nuance of research, and there's probably a whole debate of, and we can't see the chat. There's probably people commenting, well, why do we even bother having to research these things? We know they're good for you, and the answer is yes. We as scientists in these traditions are trying to, in some sense, prove the obvious, but we work in medical centers, and so to get it prescribed, and most importantly to get it paid for, like, wouldn't it be beautiful if all of our yoga classes were paid for by health insurance, right? That's kind of a lofty goal. You need to prove that it's unique to that practice, and that it is better than what could be viewed as the standard of care. So in breast cancer patients, although they don't necessarily do it, they are referred to physical therapy, PT, and they are taught specific stretching exercises to help with upper body mobility, in particular after surgery and in preparation to get radiation treatment, because 5 days a week they have to have their arm in this position, and everything is surgery here and locked in, and so they're taught specific stretching exercises. What's interesting about the Tibetan yoga is actually easier to have a stretching control group that matched a lot of these upper body movements that are part of Salung. And so that's also a way that you can do this type of research in somewhat of a blinded manner. Another challenge that we're always criticized in mind-body research. Well, patients knew they were in a yoga group, and therefore they're telling you they did better, and there's this, a bias aspect. So that's particularly concerning for what would be called subjective measures, questionnaires that they complete. If we take their blood or their saliva, which we do, and we measure biological functioning, it's harder to have a bias for those types of outcomes. So, patients in these studies where you can have an active control group are obviously, they know if they're in a Tibetan yoga group or
Thank you for listening to the Cyber Sangha podcast.
But they don't know
like
what the other group is.
Sangha,
so they're told the purpose of the study is to examine different physical therapies or to examine different biobehavioral interventions to help people recover. So most importantly, the people in the stretch group don't know that it's a study of yoga. They don't know that they're in some sense a control group. And, what we see in these types of studies is that, often there is an effect of the stretching because we know stretching is good. But when we teach people the stretching, it's devoid of the breath component, the mind component. It's very mechanical in nature. So, we're careful to kind of separate those two, because a good PT therapist is actually going to include breath and include mind, focus on that body part, etc. And the studies that have included this type of design do see benefits from yoga above and beyond movement, above and beyond what one would consider the standard of care exercise. And that's critically important. Aspect of open-heartedness, to me, we've seen benefits in aspects of quality of life and sleep and stress hormone regulation better in the yoga group compared to the exercise group. But probably more important than any of that is the closest we were able to get to this concept of open-heartedness and more of a spiritual based outcome is meaning and purpose in life. We see that these practices increase meaning and purpose in life. And you don't get that in a stretching group, understandably. And that's quite profound. Now, will insurance care about meaning and purpose? Probably not. But when we link meaning and purpose with length of life, and when we link meaning and purpose with, ER admissions and subsequent diseases, which we know they are, then they may care about that type of what we call dependent measure.
Thank you. Yeah, and that's what I wanted to go next, which is, when we talk about body, we also talk about all the biological aspects of the body. And we do see things. And are they, in your study, Sadbir, have you seen correlations between this aspect of biological changes that we can see, not only in stretching and so forth, but actually in biomarkers and so forth, and maybe some other aspect of more like Lorenzo was saying, meaning and purpose? Is that something that you've seen?
So on the gross level, in terms of the biological outcomes, I mean, we can definitely see the effects of the autonomic nervous system, which is the system that mediates our chronic stress or our emotional dysregulation. And that's manifested through increased physical tension. It's manifested through elevated levels of the stress hormone cortisol and adrenaline, noradrenaline. And it's also manifested through the activation of sympathetic nerves, which influence virtually all the organs in the body. So, for example, our sympathetic nerves also innervate our blood vessels. And so we see hyperactivation of the sympathetic nervous system in something like hypertension, which is high blood pressure caused by that sort of elevated activity of our stress response system. So you can definitely see that in the physical body through these, for the nerve activation, autonomic nerve activation, through the neurotransmitters and stress hormones. And you can also see it manifest in physical tension, in fact. And in fact, one of the techniques within yoga, which is highly revered, is the so-called shavasana or corpse pose. And in the West, this has been taught as, and has been used for decades in psychology, called progressive muscle relaxation. And the literature and research on progressive muscle relaxation is very clear that when people completely relax the body, and it's a physical technique, all you're doing is relaxing every muscle to the deepest degree that you can. You see changes you see reductions in the stress hormone, you see reductions in sympathetic activity, and you see this induction of the so-called relaxation response. So there's a very clear biological impact on that physical level. And then on the other extreme, you mentioned this whole idea of life, meaning, and purpose. Well, yoga means union, and the ultimate sort of goal of yoga practice historically is that unitive state of consciousness, so-called samadhi, called in many different traditions by different names: nirvana, cosmic consciousness, God consciousness, universal consciousness, the mystical experience, the unitive state. And these are clear experiences of these contemplative mind-body practices, but typically for many people, they'll take much more regular practice, and typically over longer terms, like months and years of practice. But people do experience these deeper state changes. In yoga, there's a quote that I hear very often from people who have really engaged deeply in a yoga practice. And they'll say the phrase, "Yoga changed my life." And if you examine that very, very humble and simple phrase, it says a lot. They're not saying, "Oh, yoga just fixed my stress, I'm a little less emotional, my knee is better." No, yoga changed my life. They're talking about, an entirely different relationship to themselves and the rest of the world. And that really is a change in life, meaning, and purpose. And people will change their goals in life as a result of that. And oftentimes it's a direction that's a very positive direction. So people will go from materialistic goals in life and shift towards more spiritual and higher goals in life. And that's a real outcome that happens with people who do these contemplative practices. Now, the research is really small in that area, but if you can describe it, you can measure it. And so we do have measures of transcendence, of flow, of spirituality. And the studies that have been done so far have indeed shown that these are outcomes of continued regular practice of these mind-body techniques.
Thank you, Sadhbir. So, Rinpoche, as we come to this last round, I'm thinking, you have emphasized even more and more over these years this aspect of resting, resting in the body, that stillness of the body that leads, maybe similar to what Sadhbir is saying, that when we are in that corpse pose in that Shavasana, if we really rest, there's a sense of inner openness. So, Rinpoche, would you like to talk a little bit about that?
Thank you, Alex. First of all, I want to thank Sadhbir and Lorenzo. I think what your quintessential advice is: do aerobic exercise, do posture, do stretchings, bring your mind awareness and attention to these places. Whatever you're able to do will help. So I hope our audience hears that, because sometimes we all are different, because sometimes people like one thing, not like the other thing, but do something. I think whatever that you're capable of doing, personally, a lockdown, this 2020 lockdown has been an amazing experience for me. I've been, going every week, a couple of times, from anywhere 5 to 10, 11 miles on a regular basis, a couple of times a week. I explore all the mountains around the Bay Area, and it's just a walk. But I never thought just hiking will be such a joy. I get excited like a teenage going to the Disneyland or something like that. Oh, Monday is my hiking day, and just hike, and just clear your mind. So I think, but I also know that we can get into these cooking things, like all these flowers in all the grocery shops are gone, because people wanted to just stay home and bake breads, which is fine. But I think, so the moving, posture, stretching, I think I would really encourage everybody. So that's one thing I feel. And then, of course, Alex's question about resting, it's been some kind of natural evolving for myself, and the teachings that I've been doing for many years. Somehow, I don't know how it came. It came to this place, part of the aging, part of work related, part of what I see in the society, what the needs are. So even I wrote one book called Tibetan Yoga of Dream and Sleep, which many people know me because of that book. So, and people ask me, please, can you teach the yoga of dream and sleep? I said, forget about yoga and dream and sleep. Sleep. That's all what matters. Just go and sleep. Do you sleep enough? Do you wake up in the middle of the night? Do you know how to go back to sleep? Do you sleep enough? Sleep well enough? Sleep deep enough? Sleep. Rest. That's what it is. I think we lack so much natural a sense of resting in ourselves. So we always kind of trying to stimulate something, energize something, and we think we kind of fabricate some kind of energy and fake up something like that. But real healing or real energy or real joy or real sense of clarity always arises not by trying. They always arises by fully being resting. So that it's nothing new. There's been thousands of years, and we're trying to always struggle and find a ways to communicate that very fancy, complicated, scholarly way, and just sometimes very simple way. But hopefully one day we will get it. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's a great place to end, unless Lorenzo, Sadhbir have any final things to say. Okay. So thank you. Thank you, Sadbir. Thank you, Lorenzo. Thank you, Rinpoche. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Polly. Thank you, Valerio. I do want to say the next event of this, and I imagine Mariela is putting all the events. So on March 3rd is our next dialogue. It's going to be called How Breath Carries Mind, Ins and Outs of Breathing in Yoga and Meditation with Shirley Tellis and Judith Simmer Brown. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you soon. Be well.
One second, Alex. I just wanted
Yeah.
to also thank
Yes, please.
Sabir and Lorenzo, and I hope, because we are continuing a whole year. I hope maybe another session you guys can come back and maybe we can go into some specific things rather than very overview, and maybe also have some opportunity to do some short, simple exercises also. So I hope.
Would be great. Thank you. Thanks for doing
Thank
this.
you.
Thank you, Alex.
It's a pleasure
Thank
to join
you.
you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.